It's a different life we're living now. When couples finally decide that, they're 40 years old and we want to have a baby, 90% are infertile already. But I think still the most important impact is societal and social. When I was a urology resident, we used to be doing vasectomies on men who were 25 years old because they already had 3 kids. But now most people aren't thinking about having kids until their mid-30s or late 30s or even 40s. I would recommend to any woman, whether she's married or not yet, she's hitting age 30, to freeze her eggs or her ovarian tissue. Even young girls in their 20s who say, kids just aren't in my book. I'm not ever want to have children. I have too many things to do in life. It doesn't matter. When they're 40 or 50, they'll change their mind. Society can't survive with a smaller number of young people building an economy for a larger number of older people. You have to have a proper balance, and without young people growing up and re-energizing society with new ideas, it'll just die out and decay.
Today on Medicine Evolved, I'm joined by Dr. Sherman Silber, one of the pioneers of modern fertility medicine. Around the world, birth rates are falling, infertility is rising, and for many people, starting a family is no longer simple. It's medical. Dr. Silber and I explore why this crisis is accelerating, how delayed parenthood is reshaping society, and what shocking new technologies may soon change how human life even begins. Dr. Silber, great to have you here. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Great to be with you, Greg. Thank you very much.
You've been at the forefront of reproductive medicine for decades. What first drew you to fertility and helping families grow?
Well, it's funny. That was not really my original goal in life. Originally, my mother wanted me to be a doctor, so I was going to be a doctor. Of course, I loved writing in English, and I wanted to be an English professor, but I had to do what my mother said. So I went to medical school, and of course, I loved medicine, every minute of it. It was hard work, every grinding minute I just loved. And I decided I wanted to be a vascular or cardiac surgeon. After going to medical school, University of Michigan, medical school and undergrad, I went to Stanford, where I did my residency in surgery, internship in surgery, and I was all set to do a residency and fellowship in cardiac with Shumway, who did the first heart transplant in the United States. But then I went up to Alaska for several years in the public health service, part of my military obligation, and I was the only surgeon that had any knowledge of urology. And so there were a lot of patients, but not enough surgical specialization. So I wound up taking care of all the urology patients. And I remember really enjoying the field. I had an early patient. His name was Arctic Johnny, who was like an Eskimo, the best wolf hunter in Alaska. He actually came down to our hospital in Anchorage, not because he was sick, but because he had to urinate so frequently with his big prostate that it interfered with his wolf hunting. And so at 84, we took out his prostate. He went back up to Anaktuvik Pass in northern Alaska and resumed being the greatest wolf hunter in the Eskimo history of Alaska. At any rate, there were lots of little charming stories like that made me really like urology. So I went back to my alma mater, University of Michigan, to get a residency in urology. But I absolutely did not like the rotation and fertility. Couldn't stand doing the sperm counts. Nonetheless, what happened in life was I did vascular surgery at the University of Melbourne. Kidney transplantation is one of the best programs in the world at that time in 1969. And there I developed all kinds of microsurgery to repair tiny little, almost invisible blood vessels. And I did that in rats. And as an application, just for the fun of it, I was able to reverse vasectomy. So I was the first doctor in the world to reverse vasectomies, which I thought was a very trivial accomplishment. But it immediately made me famous. I mean, this was before the internet. It was the AP, and I was on the front page of every newspaper.
What year was that?
October 1975.
Okay, wow. Before I was born.
Before you were born, and I had patients coming from all over the world to have vasectomy reversals. So all of a sudden I was overwhelmed. I didn't have enough time to do the kidney transplants that I wanted to do, and I kind of fell into infertility. And there was no IVF at that time. It was like a fledgling field. So I loved it because I could pioneer it. And my experience at the immunology lab for the transplant lab at Melbourne prepared me for setting up a laboratory as well. So before you knew it, in the very earliest days of IVF, I was the pioneer of microsurgery and the modern approach to IVF. So I didn't plan it, but now I'm so thrilled that that's what happened. Sometimes we have a life plan and God has different plans for you. And the plans that he had for me were better than the plans I thought I had for myself.
So it's a great thing that mom pushed you down this journey, I think, right?
Oh, yes, I'm very grateful for that. But she had no idea, and I had no idea I would be loving this field of reproduction and infertility and helping couples have babies. And it turned out to be the greatest thing I could have possibly done.
So as you're seeing now, was there a point in your career that you realized that infertility might become a global issue, not just an isolated struggle? I think we hear about it just more and
Well,
more.
what shocked me was just vasectomy reversal. I said to my wife, "Well, I can do this, and it's never been done before with the microsurgery, but I don't see much use to it because if people have had a vasectomy, they're not going to want to have it reversed." And she laughed and she said, "I don't think you understand quite what this is." And then when I made my first presentation at the American College of Surgeons in San Francisco, and it got picked up by the New York Times, Jane Brody wrote a front page article on it, the New York Times, October 15th, 1975, and then it went all over the world. Suddenly, it became apparent to me that this is really a powerful global thing. But I didn't anticipate the further development that uh, infertility was become an epidemic. It wasn't just vasectomies and reversal of vasectomies, but couples were deciding to put off childbearing until they were older, and then the eggs aren't as good and they need fertility treatment. I didn't anticipate that it was going to become the epidemic worldwide that it is, and it really is an epidemic. So
So it
I
sounds like every year it's been getting worse and worse since the mid 70s, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, absolutely right. I think it's probably a consequence of it's a different life we're living now. We're all planning to live to 100. Women particularly have equal opportunity, at least it's closer to equal opportunity, and they don't just have to marry the first jerk that they meet when they're 20 years old for security. They can lead their own life and get a career and do what they want to do, just like men always have been able to do. And so that means there's hardly any time for having children. So they put it off. And then when they finally decide, when couples finally decide that they're 40 years old and we want to have a baby, 90% are infertile already.
So it's a combination of biological, social, would you say also environmental things?
We talk about environmental. There is no question that obesity, which is really on the increase, hurts females' infertility, not so much the males. But because the estrogen is absorbed into fat cells and then it's resecreted, inhibits the pituitary gland. So, many of these very obese women who are infertile that go on GLP-1 drugs and they lose 50 or 100 pounds, all of a sudden they start ovulating and they get pregnant and have a baby. So there
And
is
they're Ozempic babies, right? As we call them now.
so there's some environmental impact, but I think still the most important impact is societal and social. That when I was a urology resident, we used to be doing vasectomies on men who were 25 years old because they already had 3 kids, and they felt, well, they should bear some of the responsibility for birth control. That was what was going on in the 60s. That was like 3 generations ago. But now most people aren't thinking about having kids or even getting married until their mid 30s or late 30s or even 40s. And I have patients that are in their 50s that finally decide, I never thought I wanted to have children, but now I realize that I do want children. But by then they just can't do it without serious and complex medical help, namely IVF and different types of IVF. So I think the change in society and putting off childbearing is the number one reason for the epidemic, but certainly environment has something to do with it as well.
So what do you tell that young couple that got married at 30 and they're putting off having kids? What should they do?
Well, we were among the people that pioneered egg freezing and ovarian tissue freezing. So I would recommend to any woman, whether she's married or not yet, she's hitting age 30, to freeze her eggs or her ovarian tissue. Now, that's an easy decision for young women with cancer because they know that the treatment for cancer is going to sterilize them. So they're ready to have the ovary removed and frozen, and the results are fantastic with transplanting that young ovary back 10 or 20 years later. Um, but if it's just a social reason and it's not a cancer reason, uh, they're hesitant to freeze their eggs because they figure, well, what if next year I meet the right person and we decide to have babies? But really, they ought to all freeze their eggs before they hit 30 so that they have that option available. Even young girls in their 20s who say, kids just aren't in my book. I'm not ever want to have children. I have too many things to do in life. Doesn't matter. When they're 40 or 50, they'll change their mind. And so at least they need to maintain for themselves the option of being able to have children if they want to have children.
Like an insurance policy.
It's an insurance policy, and it wasn't available before we developed and popularized ovary and egg freezing. We did the first ovary freeze in 1997, but the first reliable egg freeze that really worked in 2005. So it hasn't been available for that long. But now that it's available, it's really silly not to get that insurance policy.
So, do you view declining fertility as a public health emergency, or is this just a natural evolution of modern day society, or maybe
Well, it
both?
is a gigantic public health emergency. One reason is for the individual's happiness. Usually, by the time they're 40 or 50, they want to have children. And when they're 60 and they didn't have children, they get very depressed and wish they did have children. So, for the individual's well being, I think it's really an urgent issue. But for society, let's look at it coldly in terms of population statistics. You can't survive, society can't survive with a smaller number of young people building an economy for a larger number of older people. You have to have a proper balance. And without young people growing up and re energizing society with new ideas, society will die. It'll just die out and decay. I predicted that we'd have a serious economic problem in most of the world because of this declining number of younger people.
So,
Now,
some countries might cease to exist, you're saying, based on that.
well, or their economy would cease to exist. Would it become decrepit and decline? And we know that's happening in the developing world, whether it's Europe or what's going to be happening in China and Japan. We know that that is what happens with a declining number of young people. The economy and the whole society declines. You need the young people growing up balancing this age distribution. However, it's not necessarily going to be solved by my field helping people have children. The reason that the United States has had the dream economy of the world, I can't think of any other reason why Europe and South America, their economies are declining as the countries develop more and more. And the United States, to fight development, has this incredible economy that is the envy of the world. And this is going to be a controversial statement, but I'm sure you don't mind
Well, I
controversy.
think you're going to say immigration is a good thing.
That's exactly what I'm going to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Immigration. We have had the best immigration, and we're the best at integrating immigrants into our society. They have immigrants in Europe, but they have no idea how to integrate them into their society. Our history of immigration since we were first a country is what has allowed us to remain very strong because we have these young people.
Do you think some of these measures that certain countries are doing, like for example Poland, I'm Polish, they're now
I'm
giving
Polish also.
amazing. They are allowing couples with I think 2 children or more not to pay income tax. That's pretty interesting. What do you think? Do you think that'll move the needle in some countries?
Anything you can do to encourage young people to have children is going to help the economy. We wrote a paper with some economists about 20 years ago in which we computed what's called the mean the mean future value, the MPV or MFP, and the mean future value of any child born, and this was 20 years ago when we wrote the paper, would, in terms of tax returns to the country, after the age of 30, it's pure profit for the country. Whatever the country did to invest in having that child, it's pure profit after 30 years. There was a period in the 60s when we were afraid of overpopulation. Well, it is true that we want to make sure we have a sustainable world. But what you don't want is controlling population by limiting the number of young people while increasing the number of old people. Because older people, now I'm different. I'm old and I'm still working 70 hours a week. But most people at the age of 65 retire, and they're going to live another 30 years, and they're not contributing to the economy. And we need to have youth, and so it's totally switched. We used to be worried about overpopulation, and the only way to salvage the world was birth control.
So we all need to have more babies. That's universal. As
Yeah.
Elon Musk would say.
Well, if you only have one baby, you're not going to replace the population.
Right.
Every two people have to have an average of 2.1 children. Every couple has to have an average of 2.1 children just to keep the population the same.
Let's talk about some of the amazing reproductive science you've seen. You've seen IVF, egg freezing, genetic testing. What advancement do you think marked the biggest turning point for the field? What was just your wow moment?
Well, there were many, many wild moments. When I was young and I developed microsurgery and I developed a lot of fame for that, that was the big deal. We could microsurgically correct blockage, and it was applied to every field of medicine. I mean, you can't be a good orthopedist or plastic surgeon or neurosurgeon or ENT surgeon or eye surgeon without being a microsurgeon. However, I was pretty much the first to develop it for vascular and transplant surgery. And so that was really a big deal. But now we're talking about the 60s and 70s. At this point, IVF was first done in England by Steptoe and Edwards. They were pioneers, and they took chances that nobody thought anybody would take. In fact, they were, as always, pioneers were criticized by their jealous peers, and they were severely criticized. Steptoe was kicked out of the British College of Medicine, and they were just really severely criticized. However, there's nothing that quells criticism like a blazing success. And that's what happened. And it became apparent the world needed this. That was the single best, most important, successful treatment for infertility, whatever the cause of the infertility, because you bypass everything that's going wrong, whether it's the age of the eggs, the low sperm count, blocked tubes, whatever the problem happens to be, IVF bypasses it. And so it's the single best and actually most economically effective treatment for infertility. But there were so many aspects of IVF that we developed after Steptoe and Edwards because of our microsurgical background. Sperm count was always a problem, but we figured out how to pick up an individual sperm under the microscope by the tail and inject it into the egg. So the lowest sperm count was as good as a high sperm count for men. We immediately solved male infertility. Even if there's no sperm in the ejaculate, we could usually find some sperm in the testicle if we did microsurgery to look for those sperm. So that was really pretty amazing. And then I guess another thing that was spectacular was the vitrification, which I mentioned, where we can actually freeze eggs without hurting them, freeze embryos, freeze ovary without hurting them. And that way you could preserve the youth of the egg or the youth of the ovary and transplant these back 20 years later when the woman has nothing left and she can have babies. So that was pretty exciting also. What we're doing right now, which I believe will be clinically applicable in about 10 years, we're doing it in mice now very successfully. We can take a skin biopsy and we can take the cells from that skin biopsy, fibroblast cells, and we can turn them into stem cells. Now, Yamanaka in Japan got the Nobel Prize for this, so we didn't need embryonic stem cells. We could create stem cells just with only 4 genes, which are commercially available. So it's easy to do, very easy to do, no big deal. We can actually take any somatic cells in your body and turn them into stem cells. Now, these stem cells are young by definition. They have no differentiation. They're like the earliest embryonic cells. So now, if you know the right genes to incubate them in, you can convert them into anything really. But it's that conversion of stem cells to somatic cells will do no good if you need to have the structure of an organ, like a kidney or a heart. However, it's easy if you just want to make a single cell like an egg. So we just have to. So in the mouse, we have converted stem cells to competent eggs, fertilize those eggs, have healthy baby mice, all from the mother who had no ovary, and we just use skin cells from her tail. And so that's pretty amazing. Now, we can also do that now for the rhinoceros, which is for endangered species, but it is species specific. So for the human, we've gone halfway there. We can make early germ cells. We call them primordial germ cells. That's the first step towards an egg or a sperm with this method. That's been easy to do in the human. However, to translate going farther to the human, we have to know exactly what gene transcripts we need, and it's very species specific to recreate what we successfully did in the mouse. And the estimate for my colleagues in Japan, who are pretty much ahead of everybody else, is that and I work with them regularly, they think it'll be another 5 or 10 years, and we'll be able to do that in the human.
So when you were reversing your first vasectomy, did you think
Yeah.
we would be able to do that? Or was that just science fiction? Did you even think that this is where we'd be in 2025?
I invented the procedure, and nobody thought it was possible. But the reason it seemed easy to me is my basic research. I did a lot of work in the basic research lab, was involved doing kidney transplants in rats. We chose rats because they were the largest animals sufficiently inbred that we wouldn't have to worry about rejection, or we could know exactly what the rejection barrier was and interpret our results. So it was really important. In the days when I was in medical school and residency, all the surgical research and transplant research was done on dogs. It's called the dog lab. It was inhumane. It was just terrible. I mean, you had to steel yourself to going into that lab and hearing these dogs yelp and in pain. It was just terrible. So I was able to convert all that now. All surgical research is now done in rats and mice because we use microsurgery, little tiny blood vessels under the microscope. And I did kidney transplants and heart transplants and liver transplants in rats. And I did thousands of them, so many of them, to do my basic research that when I thought, well, I said to my wife, I don't see why I can't just reverse a vasectomy. It's the same thing. But I don't think there's any point to it. I mean, nobody wants their vasectomy reversed. And she laughed at me and she said, I think you're wrong about that. Yeah, I didn't think it'd be very useful. I just thought it'd be fun really to do it. That's all.
It sounds like we might have the biggest game changer with what you're describing with tissue not being ovarian, right? We can have babies with other cells essentially in the future.
Absolutely. There's no question in my mind that
And it's just a matter of when, right?
yes, because these oocytes, these eggs that we make from cell skin biopsy from a 55-year-old woman, they're going to be young. I mean, they're embryonic cells, really. Those 4 genes have converted them into embryonic cells.
So then do you see a future where we're going to have artificial wombs, basically take the risk further out of pregnancy? Women will just have an incubator almost with that artificial womb.
Well, I think it'll be very, very tricky to recreate what the uterus is doing. So I'm not going to predict when that's going to happen. Of course, one has to be open because everything is possible if you give it enough time. And thousands of years, everything is possible. But I can't see in the near future recreating a uterus. On the other hand, you mentioned a limb, I think. The issue that made it relatively easy for us to make somatic cells or skin cells into eggs or into sperm is because we're talking about a single cell. But how do you create a structure of an organ? That's much more complicated. For example, the human genome, we have 23,000 genes. Those genes represent only 2% of our DNA. The rest of the DNA is involved with regulation and structure. All that those genes do, by definition, is create a protein. I mean, that's what a gene really is. It's
Right.
a segment of DNA that creates a protein. Well, you could put all those genes in and make all those proteins and put them in a bowl, and it'd just be a bowl of jelly. So, how do you make a limb? Well, that's much more complicated. I am sure everything is possible, but it might take thousands of years before we can figure out how to make a structure like a arm or a leg or a heart or a kidney.
So
But
are we still working with nature, or have we started to take nature's place? Are we becoming more godlike, you feel?
well, we are part of nature, and so we've been created with a brain that's able to figure out how to improve life and how to improve the planet. I mean, that's what our if you look at this is just a parable. I'm not trying to talk religion, but if you were to look at where the Bible describes creation, it says, "And God created the heaven and earth to make." If you read the actual literal translation, created the heaven and earth to make. And what it means is we've been given the ability to make things better. So
And I
that's
think if you go Old Testament, we used Adam's rib to make Eve, right?
yeah,
So
right.
so we're going full circle, right?
You know the joke about Adam's ribs. It's
Tell me it. I need to hear it.
what did God say when He created Adam? He took a look and He said, "I think I can do better."
Exactly. I don't think I want to be here without women. So let's talk about ethics. You probably have been told by your critics when you were blazing some things that you didn't want to hear, right?
Yeah.
How do ethics play into conception as we become more engineered? What is your stance on that?
Well, it's funny. When I did the first vasectomy reversal successfully reported, there were urologists at the at the American meeting, who said this is absolutely immoral. If a man has a vasectomy, it should be a permanent decision, and it's immoral to reverse it. I was just stunned. Uh, when I did the first,
What did you tell them? What were you thinking? How
uh,
dare you?
I would say, well, this is obviously not a procedure for you, but there are many men in the world, the majority of men, who would disagree with you about that. And that would be my answer. I wouldn't want to get into an ethical fight with an idiot. But too many of us and it happens to all of us, including me and possibly you. Too many of us are just stuck, and we have to be able to think out of our box to really make progress. And it's hard to do sometimes. But my answer to ethicists are this: that a thing is ethical if it's not harmful to the patient and it's not harmful to society, then it's ethical. But just because it's a paradigm shift from what you're used to doesn't make it unethical.
Exactly. I agree with you. So 50 years from now, what do you think the world will look like having babies? Will it be just so manufactured? Will intercourse be just for fun? Nobody knows, but what do you think?
Well, you used a very loaded term, manufactured. Uh, the I think that we're going to live longer and longer, and our social fabric is going to change the way it already has, where we can live productive lives. And to really raise children right, you have to really have the mindset and the time to do it. I mean, it's so easy to destroy a child's curiosity or to destroy their self-esteem. It's so easy to do it because, I mean, they can be a pain. I mean, just think about it. I mean, they cry and they scream and you have to give them limits in a way in which you're not curtailing their curiosity or destroying their soul. And many parents, they don't know what they're doing, and without trying to be soul killers, they are soul killers. And so you really shouldn't have children until you're ready to have children, and understand it's a big job. It's a fantastic job, but a big job. So people will be putting off childbearing, but they'll be able to have children once they're mature, have established their roadmap for life, have different kinds of help, have delegated some things to others. And so I think it's really crucial to be able to freeze the eggs and freeze the ovarian tissue and preserve fertility.
So you're saying, for example, I'm 46 years old. I have two children, age 50, both me and my wife. If we decide to have children, the third one, it might not be that big of a deal.
It might not be what? Say that
It
again.
might not be that big of a deal. We can do it, or is that
So you
what are our chances?
I think, and I didn't really study this, but I know I've talked to other really great IVF doctors, and we think we've seen these older couples make better parents because they didn't have the baby in the midst of their immaturity and tension and trying to figure out who they are and what they're going to do in life. They really were stable and they could focus their attention on the child. And, every baby, their curiosity and soul and intelligence and self esteem all develops in the first few years of life. It's very, very early. That's when the brain is growing at its fastest and developing at its fastest. And it's a very, very precious thing to have a child. So I think when we have children when we're older, it appears that we're better parents.
I 1,000% agree with you. I'm so glad I didn't have children in my 20s. I had them in my mid 30s, 40s, and I think I'm a way better person and have all the resources to deploy for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think we can reverse this fertility decline, or how optimistic are you about that?
Well, I don't think we want to reverse the advances society has made in terms of women's rights and everybody getting an advanced education. I think these are all fantastic gains we've made. I don't.
Right. I think those are amazing. I mean, the reversing of the downward
Oh,
slope of population. Are you hopeful we can get the numbers to go up?
everything is going to happen, but that's going to take a long time. Naturally, I think right now, the technology allows it to do it with IVF and freezing. However, I'll tell you, we don't have enough evidence for this, but I'll tell you what evidence we do have. That every woman is born with all the eggs she is ever going to have. Now, men are lucky because we have sperm production stem cells. And so we just keep making sperm till we're 150 years old. Uh, but with women, they have all those eggs and they've gone into what we call meiosis. And that's a process that just keeps on going. And so all little girls would be born with no eggs if they would just allow that to happen. What happens is that the fetal eggs that enter the ovary, that enter the very tough fibrous tissue that is the outside membrane and shell of the ovary, they become locked and they're arrested in development. So even though they've started their meiosis, they are arrested in meiosis. And otherwise, they'd all be dead. They'd be gone, within a month or two. And so that's a natural process. And then every year, about 1,000 a month and about 13,000 a year eggs are dying because they're leaving that protective environment. It's not permanent. The reason that environment, that tough environment of the testicular cortex or the outer shell, is able to hold those eggs in arrest is because that tissue pressure squeezing on the eggs causes the nuclei to rotate and they arrest in their development. And they just are, it's like frozen in time. But it's not completely efficient, but it is somewhat efficient. Uh, so tissue pressure is very, very important for preserving the fertility of an ovary. So when a woman is pregnant and her intra-abdominal pressure increases, she's not losing any eggs. After she delivers the baby, intra-abdominal pressure goes down. She starts losing eggs again. 1,000 a month,
Mm-hmm.
13,000 a year. Now, if you think about this, all of the stem cells in your body, and you have stem cells for all of your cells, whether it's your skin or your gut or your heart or whatever, you have stem cells for everything. Stem cells divide very, very slowly. because if they divided quickly, there would be mutations and you'd age much more quickly. So stem cells are like the hard drive, and they give rise to progenitor cells, which divide very rapidly. But the stem cells are like your memory. Now, under pressure, the stem cells divide more slowly. The nuclei rotate everywhere in the body. Nuclei rotate under that pressure. So this is just a theory, and this part, what I gave you so far was fact, but this is just a theory. I think if we exercise and create myogenic tension and are active, that is going to slow down the metabolism of our stem cells so that we will age less quickly.
So exercise is the most powerful medication we have, I think, right?
I think so, yes. Right.
Let's talk about designer babies, CRISPR technology,
Yes.
and epigenetics. In the future, do you feel like those that can will be making these super babies, taking out those genes that are problematic? Is that something that'll probably be next?
Well, what can happen with CRISPR is we'll be able to take out mutations that are harmful, but it's not going to be a designer baby. Like someone is, is a carrier of cystic fibrosis or muscular dystrophy. There's 10,000 genetic diseases, and they're all pretty rare. So what we can do right now, if someone is a carrier, is do IVF, biopsy that embryo, and then test the biopsy to see which of those embryos have the mutation and which don't have the mutation. And then we only transfer back to the woman the embryos that don't have that mutation. So, I mean, that was started in the 1990s and it's very much perfected now. It doesn't matter what rare genetic mutation you have, and there are 10,000 of them. It doesn't matter what you have. We can do the biopsy and we can make sure that rare mutation isn't transferred to your child. And you could be a carrier and not have the disease, or there might be the disease in your family because both parents had it, and so that creates the disease. Or you can be a carrier if it's called autosomal positive, and you can have the disease and know that when you're 40 or 50, you're going to get Huntington's chorea, which is the most disastrous, heartbreaking disease imaginable. And but at least you don't want your child to have that.
So we're not going to have Tom Brady muscle babies and Einstein brain power anytime soon.
No, we don't, because there are two reasons why. There are 23,000 genes, and all they do is make proteins. And all they make, if you put it in a bowl, it makes a pile of jelly. But that's only 2% of the genome. The rest of the genome is what's really deciding how it's all put together. I don't see in the near future us ever figuring all that out. I mean,
the junk DNA, I believe it's called, right? Junk DNA?
Called the junk DNA,
right? Yeah.
And now we know it's not junk DNA. It has a purpose. But there's a second reason, and that is there's a huge impact of environment, not only on intelligence, but also on athletic skill. And it's very early on, the first 2, 3, 4 years of life. And so Tom Brady, well, it's not a good example because he looks like a pretty good athlete. But guys like Joe Montana don't even look like athletes. Or, Jimmy Connors didn't look like an athlete. Certainly McEnroe didn't look like an athlete.
The New York Jets quarterback, I forget his name.
Wayne Gretzky was not the best ice skater. There's something else that is hard to define that gives these great athletes judgment and the ability to make rapid judgments. And I believe in John Locke's political philosophy, which was the foundation of early America, and that is tabula rasa. But what we didn't realize is that development, that writing on the tabula rasa occurs so early. And it's not like it's something you can program because the human is too complicated for that. But a healthy interaction with parents in the early parts of the years, you don't know what that's going to turn into, but it will turn into something good.
What has fertility medicine taught you about hope and the human instinct to create a family?
Okay, well, of course, there's this line that hope is not a plan. So I don't like the use of the word because it's often given out meaninglessly. But you can give solid information to people. And here's the way I give hope, and I tell everybody this. I think we'll be successful getting yourself your own genetic baby. Everything I see is I think it's a good prognosis. And for most people, it's a good prognosis with our current technology. However, I tell them, you want to have a family, you want to have a baby, and that's inborn. We want that. If you don't have a baby, I found that by age 60, people are depressed if they don't have a baby. If they don't have a child to develop. And I tell them we can always use donor eggs. It sounds spooky, very spooky. However, it's still your baby because everything that's important about that baby develops from how you interact with it in the first 2-3 years of life. So we don't have any other. So we've been using donor eggs since 1986 for people that ran out of eggs, and we don't have any unhappy cases. So I say this not to pressure you to take donor eggs because I think we'll be successful with your eggs, and that's what you really want. But I'm just putting this in your brain to give you some relief that if we're not successful with your eggs, you will be happy with donor eggs, even though you don't even realize it now.
Beautiful answer. I've seen so many couples that are trying to have babies. They're stressed. They've tried numerous times. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's concerned about their fertility? Something they could take with them after hearing this conversation?
Well, stress is terrible. If it's based on a true psychological issue, of course, therapy is important. However, for most people, a simpler thing is meditation. And when I talk about meditation, I mean something simple that you can do. And if you, for example, will just 4 times a day focus on relaxing your muscles, do what yoga guides call a body scan, and just go from your head down to your toes and relax all your muscles. Just focus on only that, relaxing all your muscles. Doesn't matter how much stress you're under, you will get the same health benefit that you would have if you weren't stressed. So I don't recommend acupuncture. I don't recommend any kind of woo-woo stuff. I just think if you relax your body muscles in a disciplined way, 4 times a day, that's the best way to manage stress, unless there are true psychological conflicts, in which case you want therapy.
When did you start meditating? I'm curious.
Oh, years ago. I mean, I don't know, maybe 30 years, 40 years ago. Yeah.
Was it just a trip somewhere? How did that happen?
Well, okay. It was, if you want to know, my wife was always into this. And a friend of ours introduced us to a guy named Dick Olney, who's not famous at all, but he was very good at this, and he would have these retreats. And he's a very old guy, and he actually played football for University of Wisconsin. And those were the days when they called them like 11 man rosters. And so they would do the offense and the defense. So he's a very tough guy, goes back to the old days. And he was very good at a thing he called eidetic imagery. I'm not trying to push any particular type of therapy, but we went with him, and I just learned from him how easy it was to meditate using this method. So now I use it with all my patients when I do an embryo transfer, because they're all going to be terrified at the magic moment of the embryo transfer. They're scared, and so I tell them, I don't care how nervous you are. Uh, and your mind can be going like that. But, this can be causing subclinical contractions in your uterus, and it can interfere with embryo implantation. So we want to de-stress you. So this is what I want you to do. While I'm doing this, I'm going to be your yoga guide, and that'll teach you how you can do that on your own. And so I just tell them before I put the embryo in, I'm like a guide, and I go through a body scan with them, and then I put the embryo in. And I found that it really is very, very helpful for patients.
So it kind of makes sense because the old adage is you have a baby when you're not trying, right? You've seen people who, when they stopped having a baby, then they have a baby.
Yeah, because the uterus has contractions that you're not aware of, even the non-gravid uterus. And you don't really see them unless you do ultrasound video, and then you speed up the video, and then you can see those contractions. Otherwise, you won't notice them. And it makes sense. The uterus is a contractile muscle. So those contractions, normally, if you're not stressed out, are pretty strong in the first half of the cycle. But after you ovulate and the progesterone goes up in the second half of your cycle, there should be no contractions. So I think the contractions can be a negative factor for implantation of the embryo.
Beautiful. Well, we're wrapping it up, I think. Anything else you'd like to close with? Anything we should know about you?
Well, that's a big question. It's always asked at the end of any discussion. What didn't I cover? Well, you can go to my website, and if you're not interested in infertility, you'll see that I have a secondary interest, which is in wildlife videography. And I've made like 30 or 40 videos, and I don't make any money on it and don't charge it, but don't charge for it. It's on YouTube also, but I haven't looked for a way to monetize it at all because I'm a doctor and that's what I do for a living. But I encourage people, if they want to be entertained, I'd love everybody to enjoy the insight I've gotten about life in general from closely observing wildlife.
I'll definitely subscribe. Thank you again.
You're welcome. I'm glad to meet you, Greg.
Pleasure, Dr. Silber.
Thank you.
We can do this again in 5 years and see what the world looks like.
That'd be great. I'd love that.
Well, let me close with saying bringing life into the world is one of the most ancient human instincts, and today it's also one of medicine's most hopeful frontiers. Dr. Silber reminds us that while biology shifts and technology advances, the desire to build family remains universal. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. Follow us along as we explore the science and the humanity shaping our future. Have a blessed day.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you. This episode is brought to you by Grail and the Gallery Multi-Cancer Early Detection. At Restore Longevity and Houston Concierge Medicine, we believe prevention is power. Gallery test is a simple blood draw that can detect over 50 different types of cancer, often before symptoms occur, by analyzing tiny fragments of DNA in your bloodstream. It's a revolutionary step towards proactive health because finding cancer early can make all the difference. To learn more, talk to your physician or visit gallery.com. It's one blood test, 50 cancers, early detection for a longer, healthier life. Dr. Silber takes us to the edge of one of the most profound questions facing humanity today: how we create life in a world where biology and technology are rapidly colliding. As fertility declines and science accelerates, the choices we make now will shape generations to come. This is Medicine Evolved, where the future of health is unfolding in real time.